Princess Varelia Kitar stood at the command deck of her warship, staring at the distant blue planet on the main display. Earth, a small world on the edge of the galaxy. Weak, primitive, easy to conquer. At least, that was what the Zervanian Empire believed. Varelia had never lost a battle. She had led her forces against countless species, crushing resistance wherever it appeared. The galaxy whispered her name with fear and respect. To the Zervanians, she was a living legend, a warrior who knew no defeat. Her sharp golden eyes scanned the reports from her scouts. The humans had no advanced technology. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were outdated. Their defenses were laughable. The Empire had conquered far stronger civilizations in days. She smirked. This will be over quickly. Her second-in-command, General Kohler, stood beside her. He was an older Zervanian, a veteran of many wars. His thick armor gleamed under the artificial lights. "The humans will resist," Kohler said, his voice deep and steady. "All species do it first, but soon they will kneel." Varelia nodded. She had seen it many times before. First, the enemy fought bravely. Then they realized they were outmatched. Fear set in. Their leaders surrendered. Their people accepted Zervanian rule. This war would be no different. She turned to her officers. "Prepare the fleet. Begin the invasion." A chorus of voices responded, "Yes, High Commander." The warships moved into position. Thousands of Zervanian soldiers readied themselves for battle. Varelia stood tall, her heart steady. She lived for war. She lived for victory. But as the first attack began, something unexpected happened. The first strike. Zervanian warships descended into Earth's atmosphere, their weapons charged. The first target was a human military base in the northern hemisphere. A warning strike. A demonstration of power. Plasma cannons fired, and explosions rocked the ground. The Zervanians expected the humans to scatter in fear. But they didn't. Instead, the human forces counterattacked immediately. Missiles soared through the air, striking Zervanian ships with alarming accuracy. Soldiers in armored vehicles moved swiftly, using cover and terrain to their advantage. Varelia narrowed her eyes as she watched the battle unfold on the holographic display. The humans were not panicking. They were fighting back with strategy and precision. One group of human fighters managed to disable a Zervanian cruiser using nothing but well-placed explosives and an old-fashioned ambush. Another squadron lured a Zervanian patrol into a trap, surrounding them before launching a surprise assault. "This is unexpected," Kohler muttered. Varelia remained silent, watching closely. Something was different about this species. They did not behave like prey. They fought as if they had nothing to lose. She leaned forward. "Who is leading them?" An officer quickly pulled up data. A human commander named Darius Cole. "He is coordinating multiple resistance forces across the planet." Varelia studied the image on the screen. Darius Cole was a tall man with sharp eyes, his expression calm even in the middle of battle. He was issuing orders through a communication device, moving his forces like a master tactician. "Interesting," she murmured. The battle escalates. For 3 days, the Zervanians pushed forward. The humans refused to break. Every time the Empire thought they had the upper hand, the humans adapted. They changed tactics. They used deception. They sacrificed to gain victory. Varelia had never seen a species like this before. Most civilizations surrendered after the first wave of attacks. But these humans, they did not surrender. One night, Varelia watched a video intercepted from human communication channels. It was a speech from Darius Cole to his troops. "They think we are weak," Darius said. "They think they can break us. But we are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting for each other, for our families, for our future. The Zervanians may have stronger weapons, but they will never have what we have, the unbreakable spirit of humanity." His soldiers cheered. Even in the darkest moment, their hope did not fade. Varelia felt a strange sensation in her chest. Admiration. No, that was impossible. She was a warrior, a conqueror. She did not admire the enemy. And yet, she could not ignore the truth. Darius Cole was more than a simple soldier. He was a leader, a fighter, a worthy opponent. For the first time in her life, Varelia felt something she had never experienced before. Doubt. A war unlike any other. On the fourth day, the Zervanians launched an all-out attack on a human city. They expected it to fall within hours. But when Varelia's forces arrived, the streets were empty. The humans had already evacuated civilians and set up countless traps. Then the ambush began. From hidden positions, human soldiers launched a counteroffensive. Explosions tore through the Zervanian lines. Snipers eliminated high-ranking officers. Tanks emerged from underground tunnels, turning the battle into chaos. It was not the battle of a dying civilization. It was the battle of a people who refused to bow. Varelia clenched her fists. For the first time in her life, she realized this war would not be easy. And deep inside her heart, she felt something even more unsettling. Excitement. Princess Varelia Ketar stood in front of the large holographic display on her warship, watching the battlefield below. The invasion of Earth was supposed to be quick, a mere formality. Instead, it had turned into something unexpected. The humans were still fighting. Her golden eyes narrowed as she studied the ongoing battle. Her forces had launched a full-scale attack on a key human stronghold, an underground base near the ruins of a once great city. According to the reports, the resistance fighters had no chance of survival. They were outnumbered, their weapons outdated, and their position surrounded. And yet, they were winning. "This is impossible," General Kohler muttered beside her. His face was tense, his sharp ridges furrowed in frustration. They should have fallen days ago. Varelia remained silent, her gaze fixed on the battlefield. How were the humans still holding out? The Zervanian war machines had crushed countless civilizations before. Their strategy was simple: strike hard, instill fear, and force surrender. Most species realized resistance was useless and accepted their fate. But these humans, they were different. Instead of retreating, they fought harder. Instead of surrendering, they adapted. They refused to break. And at the center of it all was Commander Darius Cole, the human who fought like no other. Darius moved through the battlefield like a man who had nothing to lose. He was not hiding in some command center. He was on the ground, leading his soldiers in person. His tactics were unlike anything Varelia had seen before. When the Zervanian soldiers pushed forward, he did not meet them in open combat. He led his forces through hidden tunnels, striking from the shadows before disappearing. When the Zervanians used their superior firepower, he jammed their communications and forced them into confusion. And when Varelia's forces thought they had cornered him, it turned out he had lured them into a trap. "This human is no ordinary warrior," Varelia muttered, watching as Darius's soldiers destroyed another Zervanian attack squad with homemade explosives and well-placed sniper fire. She hated to admit it, but she was impressed. Kohler's voice was filled with anger. "We should send the main fleet and end this once and for all." Varelia shook her head. "No." Kohler frowned. "Why not?" "Because brute force is not enough." Her voice was calm but firm. "If it were, this war would already be over." Kohler fell silent. He knew she was right. The Zervanians had always relied on overwhelming strength to win wars. But now, they were facing an enemy that did not fear them, an enemy that fought with something more than weapons. They fought with willpower. And Varelia needed to understand why. A new plan. For the first time in her life, Varelia felt curiosity about an enemy. She wanted to know what made these humans so different. What made them so strong, despite their weaknesses. "We need to capture Darius Cole," she said suddenly. Kohler turned to her in surprise. "Capture him? Why?" He should be eliminated. Varelia shook her head. Killing him will not break them. If anything, it will make them fight harder. She stepped closer to the display, watching as Darius led another daring counterattack. No, I want to speak with him. Kohler hesitated, then gave a slow nod. As you command. Varelia turned back to the battlefield. Darius Cole, a warrior unlike any she had faced before, a leader who refused to fall. She had to know what made him this way. And soon, she would find out. The trap. That night, Varelia put her plan into motion. Her forces withdrew from key battle zones, creating the illusion that the Zervanians were retreating. The humans, believing they had won an important victory, pushed forward. That was exactly what Varelia wanted. She had set a trap. Darius and his most trusted fighters advanced into what they thought was a clearing in the battlefield. Then, without warning, the sky lit up. Zervanian warships decloaked, surrounding them from all sides. Darius had fallen right into her hands. Even then, he did not panic. His soldiers fought fiercely, refusing to surrender. But Varelia's elite warriors had been prepared for this. With precise strikes and advanced weapons, they disabled the human forces. Darius fought until the very end. Even when his weapon was knocked from his hands, even when he was surrounded, he did not kneel. Varelia watched as two Zervanian soldiers held him down. His face was bruised, his uniform torn, but his eyes still burned with defiance. He looked up at her, breathing heavily. You think this means you've won? Varelia smirked. Not yet. She stepped closer, studying him. But soon, I will understand why you humans fight the way you do. Darius met her gaze, unshaken. And when you do, you'll wish you never did. Varelia's smirk faltered for just a second, because for the first time in her life, she felt something strange, a sense of uncertainty. Commander Darius Cole sat in the cold, metallic prison cell aboard the Zervanian warship. His hands were bound, his face bruised, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had been captured, yes, but in his mind, the war was far from over. Across from him, standing tall and unreadable, was Princess Varelia Qatar. For the past hour, she had been silently observing him. No questions, no threats, just watching. Darius smirked despite the pain in his jaw. You planning to stare at me all day, or are you gonna say something? Varelia's golden eyes narrowed slightly. You are an unusual creature, human. Darius chuckled. I get that a lot. She stepped closer. Your people should have surrendered by now. It is the logical choice. The only choice. Darius leaned back against the wall, stretching his sore muscles. Yeah, well, logic's never really been humanity's strong point. Varelia's expression remained unreadable. She wasn't sure what frustrated her more, the fact that he had been captured and still acted like he was in control, or the fact that she wanted to understand him. Why didn't humans break like other species? Why didn't he break? The warrior and the prisoner. For days, Varelia visited Darius in his cell. She questioned him, studied him, challenged him. Why do humans fight so hard for a war they cannot win? Darius smiled. Because we don't fight for war. We fight for each other. Your weapons are outdated. Your technology is primitive. Maybe, but that just means we have to be smarter. Varelia folded her arms. You know your people will fall eventually. Darius met her gaze without hesitation. You think so? Then tell me, why are you still asking questions? For a moment, she had no answer. Something about this man unnerved her. She had conquered countless worlds, faced the strongest warriors of the galaxy, and yet, this human, with no weapons and no armor, made her hesitate. And she hated it. The escape attempt. One night, alarms blared through the warship. Darius had escaped. Varelia stormed through the corridors, her anger barely contained. How had he managed this? When she finally found him, he was fighting through a squad of Zervanian soldiers. disarming one before taking another hostage. He was supposed to be a prisoner, yet here he was, turning the tables like it was a game. Their eyes met across the chaos. Darius gave her a mock salute. "Miss me?" Varelia lunged. The fight between them was fast and brutal. Darius was strong for a human, quick and resourceful. But she was trained from birth to be a warrior. Within minutes, she had him pinned against the cold floor, breathing heavily. His hands were restrained once again, but his grin never faded. She should have been furious, and she was. But underneath that fury was something else. Admiration. Annoyance. Something she couldn't understand. She leaned closer. "No more tricks, human." Darius smirked. "Guess I'll have to try harder next time." Varelia pulled him up, still holding his wrists. "You are the most frustrating creature I have ever met." Darius winked. "You say that like it's a bad thing." For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. The enemy within. The days passed, and something changed in Varelia. She found herself thinking about Darius more than she should, not just as an enemy, but as something else. She told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, she knew that was a lie. One evening, she stood outside his cell again. Darius, sitting on the floor, looked up at her with the same fearless expression. "What now?" he asked. She hesitated, and for the first time, Princess Varelia Ketar asked a question she had never asked before. "Do you think my people are wrong?" Darius blinked, surprised. Then he leaned forward, studying her like she had studied him. "I think you already know the answer to that." Her hands clenched into fists. She should have been angry. She should have ignored his words. But she couldn't. Because for the first time, doubt had entered her heart. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Princess Varelia Ketar had spent her life believing one simple truth: the strong conquer and the weak submit. That was how the universe worked. That was how the Zervanian Empire had ruled for centuries. And yet, one stubborn human was challenging everything she thought she knew. Commander Darius Cole. His presence in her warship should have been a symbol of victory. Instead, it felt like a question she couldn't answer. He had been a prisoner for weeks now, and yet he never acted like one. He never begged. He never surrendered. And worst of all, he never feared her. That was dangerous. And even more dangerous was the fact that Varelia wanted to understand him. A conversation that shouldn't have happened. Darius sat on the cold metal floor of his prison cell, casually leaning against the wall like he didn't have a care in the world. When the cell door opened and Varelia stepped in, he gave her a lazy smile. "Back so soon. I was starting to think you missed me." Varelia folded her arms, ignoring the strange annoyance bubbling inside her at his words. "You speak too much, human." He smirked. "And yet you keep coming back to talk." She clenched her jaw. He wasn't wrong, and that frustrated her. She took a step closer. "I want to understand something." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "You were given a choice," she said. "You knew this war was hopeless. Surrender would have saved your people from suffering." Darius's smile faded slightly, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something deep in his eyes. Pain. "You don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. Varelia tilted her head. "Get what?" Darius took a slow breath, then looked up at her. "For us, surrender isn't just about losing. It's about who we are." She frowned. "Explain." Darius leaned forward. "You think victory is about strength, about power. But for us, victory is about never giving up. No matter how strong our enemy is, no matter how many times we fall, we get back up." Varelia stayed silent, because for the first time, she had no argument. She had always believed that the strongest deserved to rule, that the weak should accept their place. But humans didn't see themselves as weak, even when they were outnumbered, even when they were losing. They refused to accept defeat, and that made them strong in a way she had never seen before. A dangerous bond. Virelia should have left after that conversation. She should have ignored the strange feeling growing inside her. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself visiting Darius more often, talking to him, arguing with him. And to her horror, she started enjoying it. One night, after a long battle in orbit, she found herself standing outside his cell again. She didn't even know why she had come. When the door opened, Darius looked up, an amused glint in his eyes. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you like having me around." She rolled her eyes. "You are insufferable. And yet here we are." She sighed, stepping closer. "You confuse me, human." Darius smirked. "That makes two of us, princess." Silence stretched between them. A silence that felt different. Virelia had been raised to see humans as nothing more than a lesser species. Yet here she was, standing in front of one, listening to him, questioning things she never would have questioned before. Was it possible that everything she had believed was wrong? She shook the thought away. No, she was a warrior, a conqueror. And yet, she didn't want to see Darius as just an enemy anymore. That thought terrified her. An unspoken choice. The next morning, the warship received a message from the Zervanian High Command. It was an order. Darius Cole was to be executed. Virelia stared at the message, her hands tightening into fists. This was the logical choice. This was the right choice. Then why did it feel so wrong? For the first time in her life, she hesitated. She had never questioned an order before, never doubted the ways of her people. But the thought of watching Darius die made her feel something she had never felt before. Guilt. Her own words echoed in her mind. The strong conquer, and the weak submit. Was that really true? Or had she been blind all along? She looked up at the screen, staring at the execution order. And then, in a decision that would change everything, she deleted it. Princess Virelia Qatar stood in the dimly lit control room of her warship, her fingers hovering over the console where she had just deleted the execution order for Commander Darius Cole. Her heart pounded. She had made a choice. A dangerous choice. A choice that could cost her everything. She had disobeyed the High Command. For the first time in her life, she had placed doubt above duty. And it was because of one human. Her fingers curled into fists. She needed to think. She needed to regain control of herself. But how could she, when every time she looked at Darius, she saw something she had never seen before? Strength beyond weapons. Defiance beyond fear. And worst of all, a part of her that did not want him to die. A dangerous offer. Later that night, Virelia walked through the silent corridors of her warship, her mind racing. If the High Command learned what she had done, she would be stripped of her rank, or worse. She needed a solution. And for that, she needed Darius. When she entered his prison cell, he was already watching her, his sharp blue eyes filled with curiosity. "You look like you've made a big decision," he said. She folded her arms. "The High Command ordered your execution." Darius nodded slowly, as if he had expected it. "And yet, I'm still breathing." Virelia hesitated, then admitted, "Because I erased the order." For the first time, Darius seemed genuinely surprised. He sat up straighter, studying her. Why? She hated that she didn't have an easy answer. Instead of responding, she took a deep breath and said, "I am giving you a chance." Darius raised an eyebrow. "A chance for what?" Virelia stepped closer. "A way out." Darius laughed softly. "And what's the catch?" She looked at him, her golden eyes unreadable. "You come with me." Silence filled the room. Darius's smirk faded. "Wait. What?" Virelia kept her expression neutral. "I can no longer trust my own people, and you cannot win this war alone. You need a way to survive. I am offering you that chance." Darius stared at her, then shook his head with a chuckle. "Let me get this straight. The great Princess Virelia, heir to the Zervanian Empire, wants to betray her own fleet and run away with a human. She stiffened at the word betray, but she couldn't deny that it was true. "I want answers," she said firmly. "I want to understand what makes your people different, and I want to choose my own path. Not one decided for me." Darius exhaled, looking at her with something between amusement and admiration. "You really are full of surprises, princess." She clenched her jaw. "Do not call me that," he smirked. "And yet you still call me human instead of my name." She hesitated. Then, with some effort, she said, "Darius." For the first time, his expression softened. And for the first time, Varelia felt truly uncertain about what she was doing. The escape. The plan had to be executed quickly. If the High Command became suspicious, there would be no second chances. Varelia arranged for a stealth transport to be prepared under the cover of routine maintenance. The ship was small but fast, capable of slipping past Zervanian patrols without being detected. As she led Darius through the warship's back corridors, she felt the weight of every step. Every moment was a betrayal of the empire she had sworn to serve. And yet, she didn't stop. Darius walked beside her, his hand still bound to avoid suspicion. He glanced at her. "So, what's the plan once we get out of here?" Virelia's voice was steady. "We find a neutral planet, somewhere neither of our people can reach us." He smirked. "You sure you're ready to be a fugitive?" She met his gaze. "Are you?" Darius chuckled. "Fair enough." As they neared the hangar, alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. Varelia froze. Then, a cold voice echoed through the comms. "Varelia, I know what you're doing." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. General Kohler. Confrontation. The hangar doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. Within seconds, armed Zervanian soldiers appeared, blocking their escape route. And at the front stood General Kohler, his eyes filled with cold fury. "I always suspected there was weakness in you, princess," Kohler sneered. "But I never thought you would stoop this low." Virelia stepped in front of Darius, her hand reaching for her weapon. "I will not let you take him." Kohler's lip curled. "This is treason." Virelia straightened. "No, this is my choice." Kohler's eyes burned with anger. "Then you have chosen your fate." He raised his hand, a signal for his soldiers to open fire. But before a single shot could be fired, Darius moved. In one swift motion, he tackled Virelia to the ground just as the first energy blast exploded against the wall behind them. She looked up at him in shock. "What are you doing?" He grinned. "Saving your life." She cursed under her breath. She should have seen this coming. The High Command wouldn't let her leave so easily. Virelia pulled her blaster and fired, taking out the nearest guards. Darius, despite being unarmed, fought like a warrior, using his surroundings to take down enemies with sheer force. "Go," she shouted. Darius didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the stealth ship while Virelia covered him, blasting away at the soldiers blocking their escape. The ship's hatch opened, and Darius jumped in. Virelia followed, slamming the controls as the engines roared to life. The hangar doors tried to lock them inside, but Virelia overrode the system with a command code. The blast shields pulled back just in time for them to launch into the darkness of space. As the warship shrank behind them, Darius let out a breath. Well, that was fun. Virelia gave him a sharp look. "We are fugitives now." He smirked. "Yeah, but at least we're alive." She shook her head, barely believing what she had just done. For the first time in her life, she was no longer a princess of the Empire. She was something else entirely. And there was no turning back. The stolen stealth ship cut through the dark void of space like a shadow, leaving the Zervanian warship behind. Princess Virelia Ketar sat in the cockpit, her hands gripping the controls tightly. Her heart was still racing from their escape. For the first time in her life, she was a traitor. For the first time in her life, she was free. Behind her, Darius Cole let out a low whistle. That was close. Virelia glanced at him. His face was covered in bruises, his shirt torn from the battle, but there was a grin on his lips. She frowned. You find this amusing? He shrugged. Hey, I'm still breathing, so I'll call that a win. Virelia sighed. Humans, even in the face of death, they found a way to joke. She would never understand them. Or at least, that's what she wanted to believe. The truth was, Darius fascinated her, and that was dangerous. Nowhere to hide. Virelia activated the ship's cloaking system, masking their signal from Zervanian trackers. But she knew it wouldn't last forever. She turned to Darius. We need a safe place to land. Darius crossed his arms. Any ideas? Virelia studied the navigation charts. There's a small, unclaimed planet in the outer rim. No Zervanian presence, no human colonies, just wilderness. Darius nodded. Sounds perfect. Virelia set the coordinates, and the ship jumped into hyperspace. For a moment, there was only silence, just the hum of the ship's engine and the distant glow of stars outside. Then Darius spoke. Why did you do it? She didn't turn to look at him. Do what? Save me. His voice was quieter now. You could have let me die. It would have been easier. Virelia's hands tightened on the console. He was right. I don't know, she admitted. Darius studied her for a long moment. Then he smirked. Well, whatever the reason, I'm not complaining. She rolled her eyes. You are impossible. He grinned. And you're starting to like that, aren't you? Virelia ignored him, but the slight heat in her face told her he wasn't entirely wrong. Crash landing. As the ship neared the planet, alarms blared. Virelia's eyes narrowed. Something's wrong. Darius sat up. What now? The fuel core was damaged during the escape. She tapped the controls rapidly. We won't make a smooth landing. Darius tightened his grip on his seat. Tell me we have parachutes. Virelia shot him a look. This is a starship, not an ancient Earth aircraft. The ship lurched as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Flames engulfed the hull as they plummeted through the sky. Brace for impact. Virelia shouted. The ship crashed through the thick jungle below, tearing through trees and rock before finally slamming into the ground. Darkness swallowed everything. Stranded. When Virelia opened her eyes, the cockpit was filled with smoke. She coughed, unstrapping herself from the pilot's seat. Every muscle in her body ached, but she was alive. A groan came from behind her. Darius. She turned and saw him slumped against the wall, a nasty cut on his forehead. Darius. She rushed over, shaking him slightly. He let out a weak chuckle. That was not a soft landing. She exhaled in relief. You humans are impossible to kill. He grinned. You're just figuring that out. Virelia shook her head, then looked around. The ship was badly damaged, beyond repair. We're stuck here, she muttered. Darius slowly sat up. So, what's the plan? Virelia frowned. First, we find shelter. Then, we figure out how to survive. Darius nodded. Sounds good, but one small problem. She turned to him. What? He pointed out the broken viewport. Outside, in the dense jungle, glowing eyes stared back at them. They were not alone. The jungle outside was alive. Glowing eyes stared from the darkness, their owners hidden among the thick trees. Strange, haunting sounds echoed through the air, like whispers carried by the wind. Princess Virelia of Qatar gripped her blaster, her golden eyes scanning the shadows. Beside her, Darius Cole slowly reached for a metal pipe, a broken piece of the shipwreck. Tell me those are friendly, Darius muttered. Virelia kept her voice steady. Stay close. Don't make sudden movements. Darius smirked. Great, so they're not friendly. The creatures in the jungle remained still, watching, waiting. Virelia's instinct screamed danger, but something felt different. They're studying us, she whispered. Darius raised an eyebrow. Good news or bad news? Virelia didn't answer. She took a cautious step forward. The creatures did not attack. Instead, a figure stepped out from the trees. It was tall, covered in dark fur, with piercing blue eyes that glowed like the night sky. Its body was strong, its movements graceful. It had the stance of a warrior, one used to battle. Darius tightened his grip on the metal pipe. Alien wolves. Really? The creature tilted its head, as if trying to understand him. Then, to their shock, it spoke. You are not like the others. The voice was deep, rough, but intelligent. Virelia's breath caught. You understand us. The creature nodded slowly. Yes, we have seen your kind before, but you are different. Darius exchanged a glance with Virelia. Okay, that's not terrifying at all. Virelia stepped forward. Who are you? The creature's glowing eyes studied her. We are the Valtheri, guardians of this world. She had heard that name before. Ancient records spoke of a lost civilization in the Outer Rim, a species believed to be extinct. But they were here, and they were watching her. A dangerous alliance. The Valtheri warriors led them through the jungle, their movements silent as shadows. Virelia and Darius followed, their hands never far from their weapons. The deeper they went, the more alien the jungle became. Giant glowing plants stretched toward the sky, and strange, floating creatures drifted between the trees. The air itself shimmered, as if the planet was alive. Darius leaned closer to Virelia. So, do we trust them? Virelia kept her eyes forward. We don't have a choice. Soon, they arrived at a clearing where an ancient city lay hidden beneath the jungle. Crumbling stone towers stood covered in vines, their surfaces glowing with strange symbols. Darius whistled. This place is old. Virelia's mind raced. The Zervanian Empire believed the Valtheri were wiped out centuries ago, but they survived. The leader of the Valtheri turned to them. We have remained hidden. Until now. Virelia frowned. Why now? The creature's glowing eyes darkened. Because your war has come to our world. The Empire arrives. Before Virelia could respond, a loud explosion shook the air. She turned, eyes widening. Zervanian warships were descending from the sky. Darius swore under his breath. They tracked us. Virelia's heart pounded. The Empire had come for her, and they would burn this planet to the ground to get what they wanted. The Valtheri leader growled. Your enemies bring war to our land. Virelia's mind raced. She had two choices, run or fight. She turned to the Valtheri leader. Help us stop them. The warrior's blue eyes locked onto hers. Why should we? Darius stepped forward. Because if you don't, your people won't stay hidden for long. The Empire will destroy everything. Silence. Then the Valtheri warrior nodded. Then we fight. The battle begins. The jungle erupted into chaos. Zervanian soldiers stormed through the trees, their energy weapons blasting through the ancient ruins. But the Valtheri were warriors, fast, strong, and deadly. Virelia fought beside them, her blaster taking down enemy after enemy. For the first time, she was not fighting for the Empire. She was fighting against it. Darius, armed with a stolen weapon, fought like a soldier who had nothing to lose. Remind me to never underestimate space wolves again, he shouted as he dodged an attack. Virelia shot an enemy soldier, then turned to him. Stay alive, and I will. Darius grinned. I'll hold you to that. The battle raged on. Fire and smoke filled the air, but Virelia knew this was more than just a fight. This was her choice. For the first time in her life, she was fighting for something real, and she would not lose. The turning point. As the battle reached its peak, the Zervanian commander arrived, a towering warrior in black armor, his eyes filled with fury. He pointed at Virelia. You are a traitor to the Empire. Virelia stood tall. No, I am free. The commander charged. Varelia met him head-on. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. She fought with all her strength, knowing this battle would decide everything. Darius covered her back, taking out soldiers as they tried to overwhelm her. The Valtheri warriors fought beside them, turning the jungle into a battlefield of fire and fury. Then, with one final strike, Varelia defeated the commander. The Zervanian forces, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. A new beginning. As dawn rose over the jungle, Varelia stood on a high rock, looking over the ruins of the battlefield. The Empire would return, but she was ready. Darius walked up beside her. "So, what now?" She turned to him, her golden eyes filled with determination. "Now, we fight back." He grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." She looked at the Valtheri leader. "Your people have survived in the shadows long enough. Stand with us, and together, we can stop the Empire." The warrior nodded. "We will fight, not just for survival, but for freedom." For the first time in her life, Varelia smiled. She was no longer just a princess. She was a rebel, and this was only the beginning.